One of the main promises of Ethereum was to allow the creation of decentralized applications, or DApps. And by anyone's calculation, Ethereum has been a huge success. I mean, if you use price as an indicator, or the number of people developing on it, or the number of transactions on the network, big success. And yet, you and I, and pretty much everyone out there, we're not using DApps. Why not? To answer that question, let's first look at what Ethereum is being used for, which are two things: ICOs and some limited use of DApps. ICOs are clearly the biggest use case for Ethereum, and it's a pretty amazing thing. It allowed anyone in the world with any project or any idea with just a little bit of resources, it allowed them to raise money, again, from anyone else in the world, and ICOs have been a huge success. Whether you think that most ICOs are scams or whether they're ever going to be successful, I personally think that the vast majority of them will not be successful. But either way, the ability of Ethereum to allow that to even happen makes it a huge success in that regard. The second use case for Ethereum is DApps. I mean, they do exist. They are out there. Most people aren't using them, but you could. So let's look and see what people are actually using today. This website, DApp Radar, rates the top DApps in terms of the number of transactions. You can see volume in a 24-hour period. We have Etherroll, which is it's basically a casino, like a dice rolling game. Etherbots, Crypto Countries, OpenSea, CryptoKitties is down there at number 5. Ethercraft, Crypto Celebrities. So they are there and they're getting used, at least a little bit. Okay, so they're there. But what do these two things have in common, ICOs and DApps? Well, they're all financial transactions. So this isn't to criticize the use of Ethereum for financial transactions at all. It's just to point out that all of the DApps that we're seeing and all the applications of Ethereum are turning out to be financial transactions, and we're not really seeing this kind of like rebuild the internet and rebuild all these DApps that anyone can use. That doesn't seem to be happening. And when you look at this list of DApps that people are using, they kind of try to classify themselves as a game. Like CryptoKitties, for example, could be called a game. Or there's a new rising one called Etherbots, which was actually what kind of inspired me to make this video as I was doing some research on Etherbots. And it's another one of these kind of trading collectible things. Etherbots is kind of better than CryptoKitties, I guess, because you can, rather than just collect them, you can fight them and battle with people. But at their core, these are still financial transactions, just disguised as a game. And really, most of these are much more like gambling than they even are a financial transaction or game, because with CryptoKitties or Etherbots or something, you're basically buying it because you think it's going to be worth something more later. So essentially, you're gambling. They're getting more sophisticated so that it's not just like a very simple UI for just a die roll and you either make money or you don't. They're adding items and loot crates and like fancy graphics and things, but this is basically the same thing that a casino does. You know, when you sit down at a slot machine, most of them are not just like a basic little pull the lever and see if the symbols line up. Like there's all kinds of flashing lights and interactive stuff and like kind of decisions you can make at the slot machine. But that's just a way to kind of make it more interesting than just putting in money and then seeing how much money comes out. So that kind of brings us back to the question of why is it that we're only seeing financial transactions happening on Ethereum? And you've probably guessed the reason, and it is put quite simply, fees. And I'm not talking about just high fees. I mean, even in a world where there's very low fees, I think the existence of any fee is going to cut out a certain amount of use cases that you could have on that blockchain. The fees could even be so marginally low, so like fractions of a penny. But if there are still fees there, then there's what's called a cognitive cost associated with using that platform. And I'll give you an example. Let's say someone built Twitter on Ethereum. It's a DApp. It works the exact same way as Twitter, but what is necessary on Ethereum is that every transaction has to have gas powering it, which correlates to fees. And take an example like this to understand the cognitive cost. Let's say the cost on this Ethereum-based Twitter for liking a tweet is 0.01 penny. Well, it's almost nothing. But the cost for retweeting a tweet is 0.05 pennies. It's 5 times as much. So suddenly, even though it's just a tiny fraction of a penny, there's still a cost that you as a user have to put into deciding how to make this transaction. Do I want to like this tweet, or do I want to pay 5 times more to retweet it? So my argument is that this cognitive cost for interacting on the blockchain is real, no matter how low the fees are. And this kind of makes sense because we saw for a while, a few years back, there was a trend towards micropayments, especially in mobile games and even some, desktop and console games. And people really didn't like it. It almost didn't matter how low the transactions were in these microtransactions. People didn't like having to use their brain to figure out if this transaction was worth it. They just were used to living in a free world where things are just free. Like Facebook is free, Twitter is free. They don't want to start paying, pulling out their wallet every time they want to do something. And the culprit to all of this is the proof of work algorithm. So fully going in and explaining why proof of work is the cause of fees is a little more broad than the subject of this video. But I think what we're seeing is that if you're going to build a blockchain that's going to try to create decentralized apps, there's no way you can use proof of work, because proof of work relies on paying miners fees directly to process the transactions. And if there are fees, there's a large swath of these use cases that are just going to be cut out by that existence of that fee. So this is why I am personally very excited about proof of stake, which should be coming to Ethereum someday. Whether it's full proof of stake or like a proof of stake, proof of work hybrid, we don't know. Other technologies like DAG or Tangle type technologies that you see in IOTA and Ray blocks are the two popular ones that have 0 fees. Those could be very exciting. And even a platform that I think you could say is very flawed in its distribution of economic rewards in game theory, which is Steemit. I think Steemit is an amazing example of a platform that you can use without paying any fees. You go on Steemit, you create an account, you upvote posts, and you don't have to think about it because you're not paying every time you post or upvote or retweet or whatever it is. You just go on and you use it. So to wrap things up, I think the future we're going to see is that proof of work blockchains like Ethereum are going to work for financial transactions, whether it's one person paying another or setting up, smart contracts or doing ICOs or bringing, all kinds of financial instruments that exist in the centralized world, bringing them to the decentralized world. I think those things could definitely work on Ethereum, but the creation of a new internet that anyone can use with low barriers to entry is only going to be able to happen when fees are not low, not even really low, they're 0. Anyway, if you made it this far, please thumbs up the video. If you don't know it, that's kind of what gets the YouTube juices flowing. Oh, that sounded weird. Please thumbs up the video. It helps with the YouTube algorithm, and subscribe, all that stuff. You know what to do. I'll see you next time.